As you know, as every event, so this starts a few minutes late, but only a few. Can we get up maybe a little bit slightly bit more sound? So anyway, I am Professor Erkki Huhtamo from the Department of Design, Media Arts and Film, Television, Digital Media here at UCLA. And it's my particular pleasure to inaugurate here this remarkable event called Beyond Music, which looks at music and visualization in the era of augmented reality. So today and tomorrow we will have a really interesting and unusual program taking place partly here at the EDA auditorium of the Broad Art Center and at the Schoenberg Music Building. And before I begin my sort of like opening keynote speech, I would like to acknowledge, of course, the contributions of Gloria Cheng, without whom this event certainly would not have ever happened. So this is very much a creation of Gloria. And I would also naturally, I'm very delighted to be able to see here in the audience our principal guests, KAIJA SAARIAHO and Jean-Baptiste Barrière, and a number of other presenters. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of the Ambassador of Finland, Jussi Markkanen, here in the audience. All right. So without any further ado, just maybe pointing out that the program for these events that will continue all through the evening, so with KAIJA SAARIAHO's concert tonight, and then a marathon performance that you will hear probably more about by Refik Anadol and a large group of pianists taking place all through the coming night. So hopefully you will all drink a lot of coffee and stay up and enjoy that unusual possibility of hearing Eric Satie's Vexations as a visualized performance. All right, so today we will be focusing on various aspects of this relationship between music, sound and visualization. I'm going to give a brief introduction as a sort of like a kind of a general speech, and then we will have a chance to hear in more detail from our distinguished participants about the kind of work that they are doing, and also, I believe, seeing many examples of that. So my talk is titled Abbé Castel's Legacy on Visualizing Music. If you don't know who Abbé Castel is, you will know after a while. Now, when we think about the picture, the image of music, and if we think about, let's say, go back to the 19th century, I believe that for many people this would have been the image in the simplest sense. So it is the image of the musicians performing a composition. Around 1900, an important change was in the process of happening, so the visual image of music in this sense was changing. This is the way how the constructivist Laszlo Moholy-Nagy acknowledged this fact in his work created at the Bauhaus in 1925. So we have a dark black discs containing that music. And this is how Christian Marclay, many years later, in his series of recycled records, was raising that issue, and actually emphasizing the fact that the image, so the visuals of music now, was this record. But in Christian Marclay's very idiosyncratic version, the record now had become both playable and a visual art object. So obviously this is a form of collage art. So records that he had cut into pieces and then assembled again to be used in exhibition contexts and performances and so for the certain kind of new soundscapes that this composite treatment of these records caused. But it is really interesting that when we go back to the early 20th century, we see that, for example, in advertising strategies for devices like early gramophones, this idea of the gramophone record as the new visual of the music was not accepted sort of like without questioning or whether making other proposals. For example, this statement from a Victor company states, "The best friends you can have who cheer you with their music and song, who unfold to you all the beauties of the compositions of the great masters, who through their superb art touch your very heartstrings and become to your a wellspring of inspiration," was actually accompanied a picture like this, showing a huge number of tiny little performers coming out from that new technological device. So those performers on stage, in a way, refused to disappear in at least in this kind of cultural imagination. Now, however, associating musical sounds with visual impressions took many forms and many other forms within early modernity too. And this happened against the great background of the debate between program music and absolute music that is so dominant for that, I would say, that the late, especially post-Beethoven era in the musical culture. So we have on the one hand musical compositions that somehow evoke the world through sounds, but also through visual imagery created by the musical compositions. And on the other hand, we have those who were supporting the idea about absolute music which is without those reference points in the visible reality. Now, if we look at a very brief example about that first trend, so the program music and how that then started becoming part of this new world of media, I can hardly think about a better example than the classical animation, so pin screen animation by Alexander Alexeyev and Claire Parker, Nuit sur le mont Chauve, Night on a Bald Mountain from 1933, which was, of course, an interpretation of Modest Mussorgsky's tone poem, or as it often been said, a musical picture with the same name, so which then had been arranged by Rimsky-Korsakov later. So here we see an example of two great artists coming up with a musical picture, a different kind of picture than Mussorgsky was evoking. So let's have a little peek at this wonderful classical work. So I would say that this piece was very much in the sort of like spirit of the kind of music that Mussorgsky was making. But there were other alternatives, and now I'm introducing you this Abbé Castel from the title of my lecture. For the Abbé Louis Bertrand Castel was a person who proposed a new kind of musical instrument in 1725 called clavecin pour les yeux, or the ocular harpsichord, which had 60 small colored glass panels, each with a curtain that opened when a harpsichord key was struck. So it was a modified standard harpsichord. And this instrument for Abbé Castel was a sort of like inauguration of a new kind of a relationship he had detected between musical sounds and images. So musical composition which would not only be for the ears but simultaneously for the eyes. There were many variations of such instruments that were made over the years. For example, here in the 1870s, Kastner's pyrophone used a keyboard controlling both musical sounds and gas flames that were enclosed within tubes of colored glass. And then when we get to the early 20th century, we see a continuation in the form of so-called color organs, instruments that required both a score, which was both for the musical notation and a color notation. So in this case, the discussion then became about the relationship between these two aspects. So some people supported the idea that just like musical scales, we can actually define color scales and be able to combine those things together. And this is where Alexander Scriabin's contribution became a classic one. Especially Scriabin's Prométhée, Le Poème de Feu, Prometheus, the poem of fire, from 1908 and 1910, is remembered as a work which in a way continued that idea and developed it within the context of the early 20th century, linking certain kind of mystical ideas with this effort of finding a common key, so to say, between these images and sounds. So here's a very brief example about a performance trying to realize Scriabin's idea much later in terms of combining that music with those visuals, those color panels. Always a pity to cut this, but as an introduction, hopefully that can be allowed. Olivier Messiaen was one of those numerous composers who claimed to have a synesthetic skill of sensing combinations between sound, sight, and hearing. This is one way how Olivier Messiaen in one interview put this idea. In Messiaen's music, this idea of synesthesia is often present, even though, of course, as if people who know Messiaen's music know that he also took a lot of impact from the sort of like audible and visible world, especially the world of bird sounds and songs. But it is quite interesting also that in a few cases, but not terribly many cases, Messiaen thought about compositions that were really combined also with the visualization. A rather rare example is this piece that you just hear on the background, which is called the Fête de Belle Eau, which was composed in 1937 for 6 ondes de Martenot, so this early electronic music device that you that Messiaen used many times in his production. A work which is shown at the Paris Universal Exposition 1937, combined with colored lights projected onto arabesques of water in a fountain. Interestingly, in some cases, these things progressed in a surprising way. Thomas Wilfred was originally a Danish musician who performed with the Renaissance lute, actually gaining some fame as this kind of touring lute player. So it is quite interesting that in a matter of a very short time, we see a transformation from Thomas de Wilfred, the Renaissance lute player, to Thomas Wilfred, the Lumia artist. So Wilfred was one of those people who, in the 1920s, continued the idea of color pianos, synesthetics experimentation, and proclaimed a new art form, which he called the art of Lumia. So, where the art form, which he saw as the sort of like a future of art. Interestingly, for Wilfred, who started from the field of music, so the development led to the elimination of any audible part. So a typical Lumia composition, like he would be producing many times over the decades, would be something like this one. And totally a silent composition. So Wilfred's idea here was that the light spectacle that he was able to produce was a kind of a music in itself, did not need the support of these two sort of like sensory registers. And in that sense, I think he kind of joined this certain kind of absolute music trend, but in a way that perhaps could be linked with the compositions by Wassily Kandinsky, so for whom the musical inspiration was also very highly important for his paintings. Now, obviously, it is impossible to give this kind of a short introduction without mentioning Wagner and the Gesamtkunstwerk. So the idea that led Wagner to work towards the art form of a future that would no longer be the opera, but a so new kind of a combined experience that would bring all the known art forms together, and obviously which became realized over and over again at the Festspielhaus at Bayreuth, at the festival that we still obviously have in continuation. So this idea that in some sense seems to be in contradiction with the sort of like early modernist rhetoric of abandoning the past, cutting ties with all those forms and starting again from the zero. The modernist, so the ideology of modernism is full of paradoxes when we look at that. For example, its most sort of like theory protagonists like Le Corbusier were in many ways in their thinking actually connected with the past. Traditions like the Freemasons, other sort of like the Theosophy and so was, for example, Kandinsky. So it is no wonder at all that many later artists and creators who have gone back to these kind of efforts to create this kind of a total work of art have evolved Wagner and his tradition. An interesting example which has been pretty much forgotten was the Vortex concerts that were created by composer Henry Jacobs and visual artist and experimental filmmaker Jordan Belson between 1958 and 1960 at the Morrison Planetarium at the Golden Gate Park, San Francisco. These were also taken on tour and shown, for example, at the Brussels World's Fair in 1958. this is also a good example of the challenges that face us as researchers when we try to understand this tradition of visualizing music. For, to my knowledge, there is no film documentation. I haven't ever seen even a color picture from these presentations that took in a multimedia format that huge planetarium as their site. The only references that I know myself are some musical pieces that we know that were performed as part of these performances. For example, here, Henry Jacobs' little-known electronic kabuki mambo, an early electronic composition. A much better known example and a sort of like true classic of this field that I think cannot ever be bypassed is this famous collaboration between Edgar Varese, Le Corbusier, and the young Yanis Xenakis at the Philips Pavilion of the Brussels World's Fair. So here the idea once again was to create something which would be a sort of like total work, a kind of a metaphoric work combining elements of creativity for the future. Poème électronique has become a classic piece. And there's a special reason why it is important to raise in this context.
Brussels World Exhibition, the first since the Second World War, the Philips company, following an idea of the art director, Louis Carth, entrusted the design of the pavilion to Le Corbusier. The pavilion was to be a container for a sound and light show that would exploit the technological power of Philips at its best and would amaze visitors. Yanis Xenakis, a young collaborator of Le Corbusier at the time, designed the pavilion, a stomach-shaped space that transforms the spectators. The walls are mathematically ruled surfaces, hyperbolic paraboloids, adorned with loudspeakers.
So the reason why this is important, very briefly to raise, beside its classical sort of like importance, is the fact that this raises also the issue of preservation and being able to experience that. And a European project that has been going on has actually reconstructed this pavilion in the form of a virtual reality experience recently.
The VEP project restores a total experience through virtual reality techniques. From the archives of projects and images, the instructions published in the Philips Technical Review, the control score filed at the Le Corbusier Foundation in Paris and the Getty Center in Los Angeles, the original tapes of the Central Sonology in The Hague, the VEP project has reconstructed the pavilion and the sound and light show. The spectator sits on a revolving chair and is virtually located at the center of the pavilion. You can follow the entire 8-minute show with an immersive helmet, which gives the sensation of being there, and a binaural audio in the headphones restores the sound spatialization operated by the Philips technicians and reacts interactively to head and body movements.
So this is probably the closest we may be able to go to that kind of an experience, unfortunately, which is something to talk about. So Xenakis, for example, then went on to create a whole series of works that belong to not only to the history of musical visualization, but also in the history of media art installation. So this was his famous series of polytopes. Will not have time to show these. For example, this is the polytope, the Cluny, during the Festival d'Automne in Paris 1972. There are also other new possibilities of doing this, and I think that we will probably hear more of that from Jean-Baptiste Barrière. I would just very briefly like to evoke this extraordinary work that was a collaboration between Jean-Baptiste Barrière and Maurice Benayon, a French media artist, which took place in using a so-called cave virtual reality environment, where the people are sent to a kind of a safari inside that space in a place of war. And so taking snapshots with cameras that are provided in that space, and once you get to a certain space within that 3D world, it triggers this sort of like interactive composition of Jean-Baptiste Barrière, which I think was a really highly interesting experience, and once again would be great to experience again, but these caves are very rare in the world, so that is a little bit of a problem.
Thank you, Erkki, thank you, Gloria, and it's very meaningful to be here today, because exactly 1 year before, like today, as a grad student, and just like get a chance to make a wonderful collaboration with LA Phil, Frank Gehry, SAPECA, and LA Phil. And I think this photography today, talking about it 20 minutes, like how this moment in my life, and how from that moment to this year is evolved, and what happened in between, and why visual music as a form of artistic expression is very important, and I will just express it very quickly. I'm a media artist. I graduated last year from UCLA Design Media Arts Department with an MFA degree. Before that, I was studying visual communication design and photography video in Turkey, Istanbul. As a biggest inspiration, while I was like trying to understand the path through the media art, there's William Gibson's amazing world about one of the things our grandchildren will find contest about us is that we distinguish the digital from the real. It's a very important topic that actually we are in the 21st century. Basically, we are in this realm of physical and virtual world. And as an artist, I try to find this meaningful communication and try to find how actually, I was 9 years old when I saw this beautiful movie, Blade Runner, which is City of Los Angeles was where it was taken. And I was like very inspired by the idea of like how communication through these building forms, architecture can be a very major important topic. And I decided to make one of my first experiments in Turkey, Istanbul. It's a contemporary art center. And it's the first time I really truly work with the music as an expression form with a beautiful group of people from music department at Istanbul Big University. And in our collaboration, the sound was real-time transforming this building into a live sculpture. And that was the moment when you put a video online and you suddenly connect with so many people. And that was one of the pieces 6 years ago I achieved to make it. And it was a very unique process because around those days there was no any available software can handle this kind of computation. So I have to collaborate with an open source software community called BBB. So by using an open source software, it basically runs in real time and processes the sound at the meantime, and by using architectural quality of space. And later on in Germany, this time Sana's Japanese architects invited to collaborate with Folkwang Academy, and their music department was highly inspired by this idea of transforming public space through media art. And for this project, I have a chance to collaborate with a group of beautiful sound designers, composers, and we transformed this building in a public space with 8-channel sound channel information. And later on, like those kind of projects go on. But probably one of the most important moments, again, was an Istanbul Biennial. It was a kind of a special installation opportunity raised by the Istanbul Biennial. This time the topic was how I can get a chance to transform this 2-kilometer long street in Istanbul, which is basically every day more than 2 million people are passing by. So what does it mean, the sound in the public space? How can we take this psychoacoustical information and transform it into a sculpture? For that, I have given a small challenge, which was this kind of a building in the center of the street. It's a bookstore and also like a private bank's headquarters style building. And this time the challenge was recording the sound accumulation of the street in 3 days and transform this frozen data into a frozen sculpture. And the result was kind of a 3-dimensional sculpture projected onto itself, and there was a software running behind it that calculates the time of the day and how many people are passing by and some activities. I have a small video for you. later on, the software becomes getting more and more advanced, and this time got a chance to collaborate with Javier Navarrete, a composer of the Pan's Labyrinth movie. This time we have a chance to transform Arc de Triomphe in Barcelona and transform itself into a living sculpture by his tones, improvisation in the public space in real time by the software. And later on, which Erkki also mentioned, Ars Electronica in Linz, there was a big opportunity with the Bruckner House Orchestra. This time, again, learning how computational power of intelligence can be embedded into the musical perception, and how we can how we can reveal this beautiful phenomena into a poetic visual story. But more importantly, I think as a design media student, I was very lucky to collaborate with one of the most greatest professors in the department, and also there was a big learning curve in my life here in UCLA. So the dream was, what happens if you take this building, which is the LA Field's home, and also one of the LA's cultural beacon, Frank Gehry's design, Walt Disney Concert Hall. The question was, what would happen if a building has an intelligence and has a cultural memory information that we can take real-time information from the whole orchestra and transform the building into a living sculpture. And for this, I have a chance to go to Seattle with the Microsoft research engineers and researchers. I got an award that supports the process, so that last year, as a graduation project, this is as a case study, it was exhibited in the New White Gallery in here, very close to us. So this result was very important, because I have a chance to learn how to really take this big responsibility in such a complex form, and also try to develop a new software with a group of friends that we achieved get this enhancement through music, architecture, and media arts. And luckily, LA Phil was so happy to collaborate and to start our collaboration with a piece from Edward Barrès, Amérique, and SFA Castel was the conductor for this collaboration, and it was a very beautiful moment that UCLA, the DMA department, was truly supported the project. So the challenge was actually how we can transform basically the existing concert hall experience into a more 21st century sensorial immersive experiment. And for that, Amérique was the piece. We have this challenging architectural form to transform into a canvas. So basically, one of the biggest challenges, we have 3 months, and we have 110 instruments, and had a challenge of 3 days installation. At the meantime, the piece is written 1918 by Barrès, and it was his very first piece. That is, New York was highly inspired him, and there was this wonderful story behind that for him, discoveries new worlds on Earth, in the sky, or in the minds of man, which is a very meaningful story to tell by using the space itself. I have a 2 minutes cut from the piece to show you. For this project, one of the biggest challenge was like literally taking an architectural language into as a stage. And there was very inspiring moments after the performance that, as Frank is saying, we don't need any more screens. It was very meaningful because giving a chance to visual music in this context by truly using architectural quality through computation was a great experiment to learn so many things and how actually an important or how like storytelling through the space can become a whole new world. But one of the most important part was Esa-Pekka's collaboration because he was truly open to computation and adding this 3D depth Kinect camera to transform his body motions into a storytelling. I was so much inspired by the idea of basically like this communication between the conductor and the orchestra. There's like a hidden language there that is like truly transforming us to a new level. And for that, it's kind of unveiling that communication and try to understand from the computer vision. And also we have to invent a kind of a small instrument that like can understand the music, that we can collaborate with the orchestra. It's a pretty like a DIY looking, so many devices connected to each other. And we also have to create a new software that can truly transform Esa-Pekka's hand gestures into a understandable computational language. And here is a kind of a storyboarding through again by code. So we have sections like truly collaboration with LA field team and the Esa-Pekka, and we basically divide the whole chapters into like understandable moments. And of course, right here in the second floor in this room, all summer DMA Design Media Arts Department gave a chance for us with all undergrad students. We created a small like headquarters here and just make this piece. And with the power of like this beautiful space, which Candace and Mike will transform it into a beautiful experience. So we have a chance to like create this temporary immersive environment and try to like experiment with the visuals and the quality of music. I have a small behind the scenes video. Those are the projectors in the sound booth, and we have to cool them down by huge ACs. It was a so weird challenge and we had so much like problems about like how to hide them. We couldn't hide them. They're obvious, huge. I think 400 pounds, one of them. And 3 computers to run the whole show. It was like in the mercy of computation. It's my very first time on the stage. And it was a very weird experiment because we have no chance that if something goes wrong, and it's just like a very weird experience. But it was a life-changing experience as well. And recently I'm also exploring possibilities of temporary immersive environments again, like with inspiration like Erkki already showed, and transforming existing 3-dimensional spaces into a more, again, acoustically musical experience. A new one is coming called Infinity Room. I'm trying to like make a more impactful small experiments inside the room by using mirrors and multi-channel projection and try to transform them into 3-dimensional architectonic experiences. And before closing, I think it's just good to jump to the tonight's performance in the Otis rehearsal room with a very similar algorithm that we use in LA field performance. This time we are transforming Erkki Satisfactions through a live performance. It's a very minimal piece, very relaxed. It's not like Amerik's very progressive moment. It's so like calming down and hopefully enjoy the process. So shortly the life changed after this photo, and in between I had these chances and tried to explore the visual music area by and I'm so happy to announce that just recently this year I have a chance to meet Herbie Hancock, and we are now starting a new performance by creating a new kind of approach to his music and his upcoming album. And thank you for DMA and UCLA and all the professors that helped me to transform this field. Thank you so much.
So, thank you, Refik, for this amazing work. And I think that after seeing this, you cannot stay away tonight. So this thing will start rolling soon after the KAIJA SAARIAHO's concert, which starts at 8 o'clock. will end. So, and as you heard, so this will continue all through the night. Plus, it will feature an amazing group of pianists from the chair of the music department to many students. So basically, it's really a collaborative effort tonight. And so, as the next speaker, it's an equally great pleasure to welcome Jean-Baptiste Barrière from Paris, really well-known electronic music composer who's been active at IRCAM, the Center of Everything, for many years, and besides music, has been deeply engaged in field of media arts, linking visuals, sounds in his own works and in collaborations with others, and just kind of adding, Jean-Baptiste's concert will be at the Schönberg Hall tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. So Jean-Baptiste, great welcome for you.
It's a very big pleasure and honor to be here. I had the privilege yesterday to meet Robert Winter, and he reminded me a very important lesson, which is basically can be summed up by a sentence: music first. So to start, I would like to play you a 2-minute extract of something that you can see actually live tonight. This was an extract of Noah Noah, a piece that we are going to perform live tonight. So, small introduction about myself. My name is Jean-Baptiste Barrière. I'm a composer and multimedia artist. I've been working for about 20 years at IRCAM, where I've been directing more or less all the departments, one after the other. And since 1997, I'm freelance and I'm working on my own projects. What is interesting me? The search of other worlds, of other ways to create worlds. The spaces of the installation or the stage are places of convergence for research and creation. This is something which I really experienced for a long time at IRCAM and which I've kept from the experience at IRCAM. Something else which I keep from another experience is the experience of musical form. I'm really interested to inherit all the experience of all the various music culture to elaborate the form of a global experience. To do so, I'm working with a very clear aesthetical and epistemological paradigm, which is to try to elaborate the structure that connects. This is a quotation from Gregory Patterson, a thinker which is slightly well forgotten today, but who has been really extremely important. He actually speaks about the pattern that connects, more precisely. So I'm trying to find the patterns that connect image and music. And this I do not in forms of mapping, which is a very fashionable thing, which is encouraged by many pieces of software, but by conceiving interactivity as a process of progressive revelation. The technical paradigm of all the works I'm doing is always to mix prepared materials of arbitrary complexity, which can be triggered by the spectator or the musician, and which are treated or mixed or blended or modified or processed by, again, the interactor or the performer. And then in all this, there is a very similar situation between the camera and the microphone. I'm using them in a very clear way as a source of information which is then transformed. I'm interested in new artistic forms, from installation to performances, which are confronting music and images. That's really what I'm dedicating myself to. To do so, I made a foundation which is called Image Auditive, Auditory Image, which is a reference to a psychoacoustic concept forged by Stephen McAdams many years ago. And I'm also directing a research project which is called the Instrumental Image, which is trying to find ways to play image as we play musical instrument. Because I strongly believe that in the gestural knowledge developed by musicians and singers, there is an enormous amount of sedimented information and knowledge which can be useful to do all sorts of other things. To develop this new artistic form of the visual concert, I basically work on two forms. The chamber music context with soloists, which I prefer because you usually have more time to experiment and develop expression, but I've been doing a lot of operas in concert version as well. Some specificities of my approach, which are really important to clarify now. I'm always starting from the musical score, which I consider as a scenario, and trying to deduce relations. I'm fighting pleonasms. I'm not making direct connections between the score and the visual part in ways which would be working like repetition. I'm really rather searching for metaphors, prolongations, or even comments. And for that, the importance of live and real time, thanks to microphone and or cameras, is really relevant for me. There are three main levels of controls of music over image in my work. As I said, starting from musical analysis to find anchor points which are controlling explicit musical parameters. Then there are audio analysis techniques which are used in performance to analyze the specific interpretation. But there is always, as much as possible, also the possibility to have a manual between both intervention to change everything which is happening and which can be the consequence of the two previous levels. I've been doing that in many different contexts. One large operatic context has been the work of Messiaen, his opera, Saint-François d'Assise, which I did in Salle Pleyel in Paris with the Orchestre Philharmonique and also in Montreal with Nagano. And this is a very clear setup of the kind of work I've been doing in this context. I have cameras filming the singers and modifying them, processing them, putting them in context. And all this is very typical. This is the angel and the playing of the angel. This is the stigmata and so on. Another typical project is what I did with Wozzeck, with the Abbé once again, but this time with the Philharmonic Orchestra in London. Here, it's a semi-stage version where there are cameras and singers are in costume, but I'm still working with the same idea. Cameras are capturing the singers, and they are modifying them and processing them in all sorts of ways live, as you can see on these slides. Sorry, I have to go very quickly. But I've been doing that a lot with the music of KAIJA SAARIAHO, as you're going to see tonight if you come to the concert. For instance, with opera, this is a typical setup where, again, the singers are captured and transformed live in the situation of a concert version. This kind of work has been extended with dance in various contexts. This was the first attempt that we did. in which already 15 years ago we were using live cameras manipulated by dancers, which were filming themselves and then processed. More recently with Ma, a ballet which was made at Cité de la Musique in Paris, where we use the same process. Again, cameras, this time wireless. Oh, you don't see it, but it seems my PowerPoint crashed. Really embarrassing, but I crashed PowerPoint. I'm sorry. Start again. Yeah, I start again. Okay, so we were there. So you see this typical situation of choreography. The very last show of that sense with dancer. I'm again crashing. That's bad luck. That's a demo effect. I hope it doesn't happen tonight. I'll try to make it simpler. Probably doesn't like that I go that fast. So I try to make it this way. Maybe he likes it better this way. Yeah, that was L'amour de loin, Les fantômes du temps, with the choreographer Galata, and Ma, with Luca Veghetti. And our most recent project, which was made, it's one slide, which obviously is crashing. It stops when I arrive to this slide. I don't know what to do. Crashing, yeah. Apologize. I move further. I will try to avoid this slide, which is crashing. Okay. Yeah, we're going to go. Hope that it doesn't crash now. Yeah, okay. So this is a Tempest book which was presented at the Metropolitan Museum last April. The same setup, cameras filming the dancers and the musicians and the singers and processing them live and projecting them on a sphere. I work a lot with various forms of screens, which is something I don't have time to describe today, but I like to make my own screens with shapes and forms. For instance, here the screen is a piece of fabric which the dancers are manipulating, and we are tracking what they're doing in movement. So, developing the form of the visual concert is something that we've been doing in various concerts. As I said, as I said, for instance, with soloists, but also choirs, and something about the visual part. I will take one single example because we are lacking time for today. I'm using very much what is called mask in image, a prepared image or a live captured image, which is basically filtering another image, which is exactly what you saw in the example earlier. Something which I've been developing very strongly because it has very close parallel to a lot of the electronic aspect that we're using in many of the pieces of, for instance, KAIJA, but also mine. These are typical situations. Very much of KAIJA's electronic music is using what is called resonating filters for sound, and that makes a very interesting parallel which can be developed with very different techniques. That's what you just saw with, I crashed again, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening with this machine. The irony is this is a machine that we're using for Square for tonight, and I didn't take the machine we're using for the concert. Happily. Okay, I'll move to basically what was supposed to be the end of my talk. Okay. Something which is more recent, which is called Le Jardin des Songes. It's an installation that we did in Lyon and New York 2 years ago. Okay. It's staging interrogations about the digital society and using the instruments which we are manipulating every day today and which are manipulating our image and our sound. This is a context in which it was presented in Lyon. It's a medieval garden in a museum, and it was in the arcades of this museum. This is what you can see here. So they were entering in that arcade and finding themselves confronted to dreams that people would have recorded themselves, either over internet or on the left side of the arcade that you can see in what I was calling a dream station. So that's the entrance, that's the inside of the installation where you could interact with a quadraphonic sound, and you could browse through dreams and through your own reflections, dreams again told by people from all around the world. We had dreams, hundreds of dreams in many different languages. These are the different contexts. And this is what I'm calling the dream station, where people next to the installation could actually record their dreams. This is the website on which they could from all around the world record their dreams. Inside the installation, I had conceived a specific performance, which I call distant mirrors, which is a virtual performance inside of the world of the installation, where actually two musicians, one in Lyon, one in New York, would play together. They could actually look at each other, so they would be eye to eye. They would hear everything that the other was doing. This is Lyon, this is New York, and they are over internet playing together. But something which is very special in this project is that they share a dynamic virtual score, which is actually the image itself. Image captured by the cameras, and as well as sound, as I discussed in previously for other projects, are transformed and sent over internet, and they are mixed on the fly. And in the same time, the idea of this performance is that we're using dynamic scores, which means that I'm a little bit acting like a score jockey. The score is completely integrated in the scenography. The image itself is a score. It includes elements of traditional score, but the structure of what you see, the colors, are really indications for the player about what to do. But moreover, the player is analyzed in real time, and according to what he plays, I can decide what is going to be next. And he has a certain liberty at some moments to improvise, but the computer itself is programmed to improvise on what he or she is improvising. This was made with the help of a research project which is called INEDI, which is basically about this idea of dynamic scores, generating scores on the fly and sight reading them in such a context. So all this was inserting all sorts of aspects of detection and analysis of the movement, as much as you saw in Refik presentation. He was analyzing Abbé Castel live. The two flutists are actually analyzed, and their movements are also controlling not only what the image is doing, but what the sound is doing. And I guess I'm really running out of time, and I should stop now. And I invite you to come tonight for the concerts, where you will see many of these ideas presented in a concert situation. And tomorrow, where the context will be very similar, except that tonight this will be with the music of SAARIAHO, and tomorrow it will be mine. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Jean-Baptiste, and so we will go on straight to the next presentation. So we have Miller Puckette, who's an electronic music researcher from the UCSD Center for Research in Computing and the Arts, and Miller is going to talk about the sound and image synthesis, so especially looking at how these two things differ from each other. So I would like to welcome Miller next.
Sorry, I'm not going to use a computer at all. Yeah, I was actually thinking having a nice empty blue screen would be an interesting statement about things. Okay, so I realized in trying to put this talk together that you were going to see a lot of images, and in fact, I'm seeing a lot of images I would love to get rid of. Okay. Monitors have power switches. They're very powerful tools. So I realized that you were going to see such a barrage of images, not a barrage, such a wealth of images that I would do best just not to add to that, but to try to actually reason about them in their absence as a way of trying to liberate thought about them. And in fact, one of the claims that I want to try to make is that the presence of images in a performance situation, or even in a situation like this, has a strong effect on the attention and the way that, and the parts of your attention, the parts of your mind that you put where when you are in a place together with other people who might be making sounds and images and other things as well. And so just to tell you where I'm coming from, first off, I'm a software designer by trade. In fact, just for a laugh, when I arrived at IRCOM in 1984, Jean-Baptiste was my first boss. So it's a wonderful thing to see him again. The thing that I was brought to IRCOM to do was to work on real-time electronic music systems. And the things that I've done that most people use are called MAX and Pure Data, which are systems which are there primarily for making real-time, well, the way I say it usually when I'm being flip is for making noises come out of speakers. And the more academic or the more proper sounding way of describing it is trying to make a thing that enables composers to build musical instruments that can make sounds that weren't makeable by the instruments of yesterday. This is, in a sense, this was my understanding of what IRCOM, which is a center in Paris, France, created by Pierre Boulez, was in fact put there to do. It was to put new resources in the hands of composers that in some ways, in a process of give and take with those composers, would then advance the possibilities of music making in the world. And I took that to mean real-time music generation, because I thought that although there was already a rich tradition of doing music in studios, which was then presented as concerts of what we used to call tape music, there was a strong ethos both at IRCOM and at MIT, where I was trained, that in fact musical instruments really had to be real time for you to be able to express your musical ideas on them. And possibly the reason for that, although I don't know how to explain this very well, is that performers who are performing with musical instruments, including composers who primarily have also music performance experience. A few of them don't, but most of them do. They have a kind of an instinct about time, or not an instinct, a practice about time. What's the word? They can make their bodies do things in time that come out as music when they do them to musical instruments. And part of what a musical instrument is a thing which translates bodily motions or bodily impulses into sounds that come out of the instrument, right? And as a music performer, as a composer, your job is, when you're playing an instrument, is to make the sounds come out, but crucially, and crucially about music, to make them come out in a way that whose time structures are musical, right? So putting together pitches or putting together static timbres, that's to say sound qualities, is a thing that you could envision doing with a computer, because you could just sort of think about what it was that you wanted to do and then make it come out of the speaker. But doing something that has a particular kind of a rhythm, that is a harder thing to do, because why? here's what doesn't work. Why don't you just take a piece of paper and draw a bunch of dots on it that are spaced in space exactly like you want the rhythm to be in time? Right? In fact, there are scores that look like that. It turns out that if you want the thing to go pa believably, you cannot put the dots on the piece of paper that do that. Your spatial knowledge, your knowledge about spatial proportions and your knowledge about time proportions just plain don't connect. They aren't the same thing at all. And part of the training of a composer, in fact, is to be able to make a representation of something that actually goes pa in time, but make it on a piece of paper in a way that stretches over space. And then part of the discipline of a performer is to be able to figure out from those dots what an actual musical timing might be in order to play those things. But it's well known that you can't just take the numbers that correspond to those musical values, the quarter notes and the eighth notes. You turn those into their exact time equivalent, and then you get something that sounds like a music box playing instead of something that sounds like a human playing. And in fact, a large part of the musical message of trying to play such a score might be lost. So there's something about time that musicians know about, although they don't know how they know it, or at least if you ask them, they can't explain to you how they know it, which I've done, and they can't. And it's a thing that simply doesn't have any representation in the thing that we're used to doing with computers. So now let me talk for a moment about computers. When I was a kid, when I was a young adult in the 70s and 80s, a computer looked like a square of green phosphor. A rectangle of green phosphor, and there were 24 lines of characters this way, and there were 80 lines of characters that way, and that was the thing by which you talked to the computer. And the thing about that was that it was an excellent way to write text. That's to say, you could write your PhD thesis on one. That would be cool. You could write programs. That was no problem because programs actually turn out to map very, very well. Although programs are things which have a logical structure in what you might think is time. That's to say there's an order of execution. The time doesn't matter in any of the musical ways that don't get represented very well on the screen. So it turns out that as a way of talking to a computer about, well, first you take the money and then you count the money and then you figure out how much the chocolate bar was going to cost and then you subtract and then that gives you the amount of change that you're going to make come out of the chute, right? Because computers are really banking machines. And before that, they were machines for making missile trajectories. The idea about using them to make music is a complete, or to do media, to do any of the things that we actually do now on computers, is a complete distortion of the purpose for which the computer was originally designed, which is very interesting because if we think that computers are the most important cultural infrastructure that we have now for spreading culture. They were made for literally for computing missile trajectories, and then later on for doing accounting, office work, right? As David Ziccarelli described it. Well, okay, so programs, a computer program like the one I described about making the change for the chocolate bar, is not the same thing as making something happen in musical time. Right? And one possible way of describing that difference is this. The computer program, when you write it, is supposed to run as quickly as it possibly can. And the faster it runs, the better the computer was, you think. And there are large problems like forecasting weather where the problem really is getting the computer to run fast enough so that it'll actually compute tomorrow's weather before tomorrow actually arrives and you can just observe the weather. Right? In music, the problem is not to do things as fast as possible, but still to do things at exactly the moment in which it's appropriate to do them. And that is a different thing. You still might want to or might have to be fast in order to get your job done. But the important thing is understanding enough about time in order to make things happen at the time that is musically appropriate. And so that is what we call real-time programming, or at least that's what in the arts we call real-time programming. And that is a radically different thing from trying to make the computer operate as quickly as possible. Right? In fact, it frequently amounts to slowing the computer down or making the computer wait. And so, in fact, a large part of what I did or am still doing in my computer music research is figuring out how you describe to objects when it is appropriate to do a thing, and also in a subsidiary way, what is the appropriate thing to do at that moment in time. Right? So this is all framing what I'm going to try now to talk about, which is what happens when you bring images into this situation. Well, people who used computers in the 70s and 80s and 60s and 50s actually thought that images were a better way of organizing input and output to a computer than would be sounds. And my proof for that is that you saw printers hooked up to computers or card punches hooked up to computers a long time before you saw speakers and microphones hooked up to computers. People, when they were thinking about what computers were, didn't think that you would need a microphone and a speaker on it, but they sure did think that you would need to make marks on a piece of paper so that you could write down numbers and things like that, right? And also to have a nice typewriter-ish keyboard, the ASCII keyboard, so that you could make characters appear on a screen. In a mode of operation in which time is not important except that there's a deadline, so time is only important insofar as you want the programming to go as quickly as possible, as well as the computer to run it as fast as possible, right? So the history of using images with computers is one of control and of programming and of description in a particular way. For instance, the kind of description that you do when you write the computer program, or the kind of description that you do when you put an image up on the wall for your students to fall asleep to trying to read, right? So which is how we teach college these days, right? It's all PowerPoint, right? That output was not designed that was not designed as a musical input-output device. And the interesting thing, besides the fact that the computer has been perverted completely outside of its ordinary, God-given purpose of helping us design missile trajectories, the other thing is that it turned out that stupid bookkeeping and essay writing interface is now turning into another medium of artistic output, which is that computers can make what we think of as artistic images. I don't know what you mean. I don't know what I mean by that. Images of use in art making. Right, and indeed, one goes now to concerts and one hears stuff coming out of speakers and one sees stuff coming off of screens of one sort or another. And here I have to tip my hat off to Jean-Baptiste for saying, yeah, the screen shouldn't have to just be a rectangular thing on a wall. It should simply be a thing that makes images possible to make in as unobtrusive or uncomputer-like a way as you possibly could organize, I think, to make the concert as well as it could be made. Okay, so now we add images to a situation which, at least if you're a composer, has already been very well kind of understood, which is that which we call making real-time computer music, which was the big EarCom project, which is now, pretty much in place. People can do that now. I hate the tools, by the way, just as much as you all do, but the tools are there, and they could be made better, but someone would have to think about how to. But to go back now, as we saw from earlier talks, there is in fact a long history of people thinking about what happens when you actually add images to musical production, and I want to add a couple of things to that. Besides the first thing that I said, which is that the representations of time break when you try to move from the auditory domain to the visual domain. Another thing to mention is that why do people go to concerts? Well, I think I know of 3 reasons that people go to concerts, and the last one I guess is going to be the important one, so I'll start with the stupid ones. One is to be seen by the other people going to the concerts. Well, to put it more politely, one is the social aspect. It's really cool when it's possible to actually get together physically and be in a space. That's a good thing. Okay. Number 2 I forget, so we'll just blow it off because I can't read my notes in this light. And number 3 is the important one, which is that when you listen to a piece of music over speakers at home, say it's playing off of a nice record, you can't see the music getting made. And it's very easy not to know it's basically universal that you don't know exactly what's going on to make the music. But it's very easy for there to be things in the music which you are not aware of, that you would have been aware of if you had seen it getting done. And those things you are aware of if you just go see it get done. And it's an amazingly powerful thing, and it sounds stupid, but if you go watch a string quartet play a quartet for you, or that is a radically different experience from listening to the quartet at home, simply because you get to watch their fingers move, and that helps your brain parse what the music is. That helps you actually pick apart the structure of the music, right? That's a reason. That is a reason for going to concerts. Now I remember the second reason. The second reason is that you can make the sound better because you can have very expensive sound equipment. And I was going to poo-poo that as being not terribly important either. Am I going to stop soon? Okay, good. So now I want to ask the question: why? How would synthesizing images help an audience hear the music in the same way, or perhaps in an even more powerful way, than watching the fingers move helps you hear the music? I'm sure that watching the fingers move helps me hear the music, and I think that's cool. Now, why? Now, that tells me that a thing that I should not do is place an image above a performer who's playing in a concert. Sorry, that might be something we'll see tonight, so I'll just apologize for saying this. Why? Because you're directing people's attention away from the important aspect of the performance, which is the fingers moving, and also, of course, the breathing and the body motion and everything else that tells you what the performer's doing for you, right? So what should you put up there? Well, I think that's a problem, and I think actually, having stated the problem, what I would like you to do is think critically about the function of adding image to what is already image, which is that of a concert performance. What does it add? And in doing that, what does it take away? In what ways does it actually draw your attention into it in ways that make you even perhaps sometimes less able to hear the music as it is? Or, to put it another way, perhaps it enters your brain in a different way, the music does, than it would if you were watching a concert in sort of computer off mode, because your attention, the layer of your attention that wants to analyze the thing is being pulled to a screen, and therefore the sound actually enters your head in a way that is more immediate or deeper or less conscious. In fact, I was aware of that happening to me when I was listening to I've forgotten the name of the piece already. The excerpts of KAIJA SAARIAHO's piece that had the video to it, Stellaborn or something like that. Still Leben. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I can't really pronounce it. You hear the music radically differently because you're watching those images. Not just because the images are putting a narrative on the music, but also because the images are occupying a large part of your brain to just parse the images, and therefore the music is leaking in through the cracks in some way. It is a radically different experience from just listening to the thing, well, just coming out of speakers, or listening to someone play a violin or a piano in front of you. And I'm just going to stop here because I think if I try to warm up to some other big point, then I'll just take too long. Do we have time for questions, or are we just going to move on to next? We'll do that at the panel. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you, Miller. And as now we switch perspective again and to start looking at these things from the side from the visual arts. And we welcome Candace Reckinger here and Michael Patterson from the USC, the Division of Animation and Digital Arts. And let me just add, even before I give the microphone for them, so let me remind you at tomorrow 5:30 in this space there'll be one of these concerts in our event which will be visualized by them. So which is you can find the program in those leaflets right there, and certainly worth attending. So yes, without further, I'll give it to you.
Thank you.
I'm not saying we'll pay attention to it, but we have one.
I just have to find. Yes. There we go.
And so while we are setting up, so let me just mention that after this presentation we have like a 10 minutes break, and then I will give the floor for Robert Winter, and we will have a panel with the speakers from today and continue the discussion. So we get your questions. So don't forget your questions. So keep them in your mind and post them when we get to that spot.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Candace Reckinger,
And Mike Patterson.
and we teach at USC in the School of Cinematic Arts in animation and digital arts.
And like what we're actually going to be giving a concert that you may have said tomorrow night at 5:30. There's going to be 4 works that are going to be performed live. 2 Bach, 1 Tristan Perich, and the Gene Kuczynski percussion piece.
So we're doing two classic pieces, and then we're doing 2 contemporary pieces.
So we have a very different background than the other speakers tonight. We actually started in experimental film, and then went into careers in commercial filmmaking and music videos, sort of in the beginning of MTV.
So Mike went to Cal Arts in the experimental film graphics program, it was called at the time, and I actually graduated from UCLA in the film school, and I was working in film and video art. And in the mid-1980s, we had come out of school, and we looked at the landscape of the entertainment industry, and we both worked for a year or 2, and we could not find places for ourselves because we were really, much more experimental visual kind of mode, and we were not interested in conventional entertainment media. Television and movies were very, very different from what they are today. But luckily, a film that Mike had done was seen by somebody in the music business, and music videos had just started up in about 1983, and we were offered an opportunity to work on a music video. So we started working with music at the very, very beginning of our careers. We were basically creative, experimental, short filmmakers working in popular music. Yeah. So we have a visualist approach, is how we think of ourselves, is in relation to the dominant, what was the dominant entertainment industry at the time, and as directors, we call ourselves visualists. We're interested in the visual expression of concepts. We like to engage the senses. We like a multi-sensory audiovisual experience, impressionism over story and narrative. We're interested in spectacle. We like to create virtual worlds.
Yeah, the one thing that we were never really interested in traditional storytelling, but in exploring kind of aspects of how story might come in obliquely. But we really also embrace abstraction, the notion of impressionism, the notion of the pairing of pictures and music together to create something more, something that wouldn't be without the pictures. I think it's a really interesting subject because some people just don't like to see images while the works are being performed, and maybe not all pieces of music need to have pictures. I think for Saturday's concert or Sunday's concert we've picked some good ones.
We were unusual in the music video world, in the music industry world, in that we were avid symphony goers. And I had grown up playing piano and doing voice, so we've had a lifelong love of classical music. So we found ourselves in the field. I mean, now we understand we've been in the field of visual music without necessarily having used that term, but the term is now a recognized term. One of the things we're very interested in is we're very interested in form, and we share that with music. And form is not really something that the visual arts have been too interested in the last, say, 50 years. But we like form a lot. We like time. We like structure. We like spontaneity, but we like to work with time. And one of the things that we like to work with is montage, as compared to traditional editing, which is putting together a story. We are very interested in the art of creative montage, in creating visual sequences. And with that, we share something very deep with music.
So we've been doing a number of different things in our career, not just making media for television or for live music, but for also for live events. Internet keeps trying to connect here. One of the things that this is one of the statements we like because it's not a literal experience. It's listening to music it reaches you in a way that is almost indescribable. Let's see So
So when you're in the entertainment industry, story is the dominant concern. If you're in commercials, the story is a message of something you're trying to sell. If you would attend a talk at our school at USC, story would be something that would be talked about right away. So we're not really storytellers. We're not anti-story, but story and characters and dialogue is not where we start. We're very interested in immersion. And I have a degree in painting, actually. And we're very interested in, we think that this desire for immersion is something that artists have tried to do at many times over the centuries. This is the Sistine Chapel, and then we have we were just in Florence last year. It didn't move.
Okay, hold on. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think we should be good.
Okay. So we're very interested in immersive experiences. When I was finishing up my degree here in the early 80s at UCLA, I was actually, one of the things I was playing around with was the idea of storytelling on more than one monitor. So right away we got very interested in the idea of moving off the screen, but we started working commercially and we segued into doing that for a long time.
Yeah, like we teach also, and our students, ask like, well, how do you not have a story? It's like, we say like, well, imagine walking into a beautiful forest, experience the light, the sound, and the environment as it's revealed as you walk through. You are the camera. You move through it, and what it's doing is it's like nature. It's like you take it in, and you have your own experience that alludes to story, to a place and to a mood. The other thing is that you've been affected. It's like you can't say that you go to a really amazing place like that and it affects you without any story whatsoever.
So another thing we're interested in is other than development of a story or development of action and conflict, we like wonderment and delight. We like contemplation. We like a lot of the wonderment and delight that exists in the very earliest days of cinema when people would go and it was quite astonishing to see a train on the screen rushing towards you.
So we were invited to do a large project to open the Frank Gehry New World Center in Miami by creating a piece, visualization of pictures at an exhibition. And we, with a team, with a team of our graduate students, we created the media on 5 screens in this hall, which was this spectacular space with 12 projectors stitched onto 5 screens. We worked directly with the conductor, Michael Tilson Thomas, to orchestrate this by starting with the history of the music and kind of the stories around each of the sections of pictures in an exhibition.
We were very lucky because it's based on 10 paintings by Mussorgsky's friend, Victor Hartmann. So it was almost like the images were lying in wait, waiting to be animated by us 100 years later.
So it was a very interesting experience because no one had ever made anything for this hall before. The actual opening work by Tal Rosner for Tom Addis was very different than this it was Polaris, right?
And actually, Tal Rosner worked with Casey Rios from the school here on one of those works for the opening week.
But what we wanted to do is we wanted to incorporate all those words that we talked about earlier, like impressionism, things like that, to kind of convey these segments of the piece, which did have a pictorial aspect to them, without delving into some kind of a linear, literal story, to let the viewer have their own experience. The atmospheric qualities of the hall were accentuated by color, by very elaborate lighting, moving lights, and effects that we worked on with the lighting director, who had been with Cirque du Soleil.
This was a very exciting project for us because it was not a pure cinema experience. It was a blended, hybrid, theatrical experience. And the lighting and the live performance and the animation and the presence of the audience all came together to create it.
So you can see I've comped on some images of projectors, and you can see that the projectors were poking out of little rooms inside the screens. This was actually in the hard hat stage of the building, where no one actually knew what it was going to be like to even see anything in there yet. Here's some images from some of the sections. This is from the Baba Yaga section near the end. So
this is from the top one is from Bidlo on Russian peasants. The one below is from the old castle in Italy. The one below that is the Nomus, based on kind of like a Russian nutcracker. The catacombs, the ballet of the unhatched chicks, and underneath is the finale, the Great Gate of Kiev.
So we got a little clip here we can show here.
Screens, but those are the three main screens.
One of the things, too, that we discovered, and this is so interesting in a hall like that, is that we had our first rehearsal with Michael Tilson Thomas, and it was November. It was like right around this time. And we were so stressed out because no one had ever projected anything in the hall, ever. They never even turned the projectors on.
We had to wear hard hats during most of our meetings in the hall, and they only had a few seats set up so we could meet with Michael. So and then they got the projector running finally, so we projected in this hall, and the screens were so massive. It's like an IMAX theater, except it's about 20 feet closer than you expect it to be.
And we realized that, like, by having them so close to us, the way humans orient to spaces that big is they orient toward the horizon, toward the landscape. So we had to make the images a lot smaller and to recede in perspective, and also none of this, no panning, because
and movement in general had to be slowed down because the effect was so intense that you started to get nauseous watching the screens. Not unlike what happens now when if you put a VR headset on, and it takes you a while to orient yourself.
This is another clip to show that.
Yeah,
this is the clip that's the theme, the promenade theme, and this is where we go back in time into the Louvre, and the big guy right there represents Mussorgsky walking through the exhibition. But you'll be able to see that the stillness of this, and this was actually very successful in the hall. This is what our file was like that was projected and split onto the 5 screens, which gave the audience the time to just kind of rest and absorb into the space. So because some people were against seeing any images whatsoever, but then on the other hand, there were people who felt the opposite.
In general, critics from the classical music world were opposed to having images, and then the critics that came from the cultural and travel worlds were extremely excited by the experience. So that's how it pretty much came down to that.
And the musicians were stamping their feet because they were into it because it was kind of more driving where their culture was going.
Yeah, so the orchestra, the very young orchestra, was extremely enthusiastic about doing the piece.
So this is just a really brief thing. We started talking about it literally. We came from a very interesting 10 years, 85 to 95 from MTV, where this is us working at the kitchen table, the old-fashioned way on film. We had done a project that was kind of coming out of a film that I animated, an animated short film that actually became this video. And this video was a really good kick for our careers.
This video helped her, along with Roger Rabbit, helped to necessitate animation as a form.
And but basically, we're also, we talk a lot about hybrid image making. I don't think we've ever even shown these skills before. These are from the shoot. But basically, we're hybrid filmmakers. We don't say we do a lot of live action. We also do design, graphic design, animation, but we don't really draw any kind of borders between mediums at all. I mean, I think that we kind of think of ourselves as media agnostic.
But what we liked about music videos was we liked the poetic compression. We liked the impressionistic storytelling. We liked mood, atmosphere. We liked the visceral energy of music wedded with visuals. And we really, really enjoyed the pop culture iconography.
These are all really applicable to contemporary music and classical music, we feel. I think we have to have a respect for the music so that we don't run over the music. But I think that's been easy for us because after serving clients and commercial purposes for so long, it's actually been incredibly enjoyable to have that new relationship with the music medium.
So one of the things we explored early on after we did our first project was this notion of a friend of mine who's a film scholar. She uses the term vertical montage. Which is the layering of images. It's making a composite blended image. And we were very interested in that early on. Very difficult thing to do with analog media, but with digital technology becomes something you can do very, very easily.
Yeah, so we just talked about the fact that we're hybrid and creating this this composite image. We've done a number of videos that were kind of more impressionistic and poetic like that, to try not to literally tell any story but to give impressions. We've also done a classic Hollywood style musical for a series of videos with Paula Abdul where we created a character generated from meetings with Gene Kelly. I think a little bit longer because we started late. But anyway, this was a very amazing exploration of form, again, through choreography and working with movement and music.
And this was a very interesting experience for us, to work with dancers. Now these are generally popular dance, jazz, popular dance, hip-hop. But we really enjoyed working with dancers and physicality of dancers, and that's something that we continue to do today.
Yep. So anyway, no, it was really a blast. We really love visual design, but also, yeah. So we just want to close on talking about these live events that we're doing. We've done a couple of these now.
So what we started doing at the film school, and they had not had activity like this before, is we started staging outdoor live events that were involving architectural projection, that were involving performance of music with visuals, even performance in which there's one animation artist who actually performs inside her own animation with original music. And we would do projects with our students for these events. They were exciting, very fun, active events.
And this is a very big point. I think it really changes a lot of things. This whole idea of immersive and engaging spaces. Like when Refik was talking about this, like literally you remake the architecture and you create this experience where the audience can move around, it can come, it can go. You're not locked to a seat. So we love this idea. We love the idea that the audience can move. It's active. It's not a passive audience sitting in a chair, but it's an active audience that moves around. So, you know, like nature, you can take it in and have your own experience. So these events would have things like architectural mapping. You know, we do some pretty involved physical setups. Here's a person who. Davide Quayola, who was actually doing a live rendering of visualizations of music that was coming right off of the music to generate a lot of this work, and then their software was able to, the other person navigated the space almost like a game, like a person playing a video game, so it was truly a live experience. And we had very, weather balloons, large crowds of people that could just mill around, go to multiple stages.
We actually had a gallery inside the building, so there were intimate spaces. There were certain of the exhibits were interactive. You wear a headset, or you could actually operate the visuals yourself. This is Miwa Matreyek, the animator. She's a CalArts graduate. She performs inside of her animations.
Yeah. Here, we can show you a little bit of this. So anyway, earlier this year we put on an event with a contemporary music event with work with Thomas Addis, Arcadiana, performing live with quartet, and it was a 7-part quartet, and where we're creating these different worlds. We're finding the work very, very exciting. Jeffrey Holmes, Veronica Krausis. Anyway, we found it, we were really happy and thankful that we were invited to create work for this event from Gloria, and we invite you guys to come tomorrow night, 5:30. I think we've got a couple little images here.
This is from
in this room. So that'll be the Tristan Parrish, the Bach, the Kuczynski
percussion piece,
and
then the Wind Blew,
and
Bach Sarabande.
Yes. So the
Partita.
So anyway, that's it.
So thanks a lot, Candace and Michael. And all right, so let's have a 10-minute break. And if you need to use a restroom, so we have opened the the doors to the elevator lobby, and the restrooms are just on the left-hand side. So please come back in 10 minutes, and then we will have a panel which is led by Robert Winter with the speaker. And don't forget your questions. One, two. Okay, everybody, let's begin again, and so I would now like to step down from the podium, and Robert Winter will take my place, and I will just say very few words about Robert. So because there are far too many things I should say. Robert, musicologist, pianist, author, and also a multimedia pioneer, who was actually one of the first, and I would say the first person who started looking at possibilities of using multimedia technology in music education, producing some groundbreaking, I would say classical work for the Voyager, and then also producing CD-ROM work for his own company, which I think was called Calliope Media, and so many other things too. And I'm also pleased to also welcome KAIJA SAARIAHO to join the panel. So Robert, your turn.
Great. My plan is to open it up to comments and questions very quickly, as I've already mentioned to a couple of you. By the way, I'll be the one voice you can understand today, okay? I just want to make a comment about what Bill said about computers to kind of maybe set the stage for part of the discussion. The mainframe computer and the personal computer come from two completely different places. And actually, the first mainframe computers weren't for trajectories, they were for the 1950 census. Because it was discovered in the 40s that they weren't going to be able to put enough punch cards in warehouses to do the census, and that's what they really commissioned at the University of Pennsylvania. The personal computer, as it comes, and this is only partly my own work, but largely my colleague Richard Lanham, who was in the English department here for many, many years, is really a product, it's kind of the ultimate piece of postmodern art. And I was asking just a moment ago, Refik, how he was actually driving this stuff in Disney at that wonderful Amérique a year ago fall. And it was with laptops. And laptops they come from Duchamp, they come from Magritte, they come from Liechtenstein, they come from Warhol, they come from Oldenburg. All of the processes, and Christo, all of the processes that personal computers do are predicted by visual art. They have almost nothing to do, which is one of the reasons why they're pretty good for the things we're doing now. And I suspect almost everybody at this table, including Jean-Baptiste, drives most of what you do now, not on mainframe computers, but on laptops of one kind or another. And they're really pieces of art. Anyway, it's overpowering to me to be present with all this talent at the same time. I mean, I don't know, you all realize what this is up here on the stage? You get it? Yeah, okay. It's extraordinary. And one of the things, I was so glad we had at the end here, Michael and Candace talking about music videos, because of course, that's kind of where it all started in some ways, right? And so you guys you were really deep into it, and then you kind of got out of it and did something else. And I'd like to ask first, where do you think the kind of work that you do connects to the kind of work that Jean-Baptiste is doing at EURECOM? For example, when you said you don't do narrative, almost everything I saw of yours looked sort of narratively like narrative to me. Not that it was traditional, one-directional narrative, but the human mind wants to create stories. You can't stop us from doing it, right?
In order to structure, yeah.
Right. So maybe you could say a word about that, and then Jean-Baptiste, you could talk about how does your work connect to the world of music videos, for example. I know that's a really off-the-wall question. You may not get asked a lot, but perhaps you could speak to that after they speak. So,
We were in a research lab for 10 years, courtesy of MTV. It was very nice.
You need to get right close to your mic.
We were in a research lab, courtesy of the music industry, for 10 years. It allowed us to experiment. Because we came in with a video that was a groundbreaking video, you know, kick-started animation up again. Every time we did a project, we were asked to innovate. They'd say, and they'd give us, at least the first 7 years, we had a lot of freedom. We just had to do a little bit to sell the song and sell the artist. And the better the artist was, they usually were hands-off in those days. It was before music artists suddenly wanted to direct also and make their own videos. So we got a lot of freedom. So we were kind of in a laboratory of production, and people were very good. A lot of the people who you see as directors nowadays, like David Fincher, those were our peers when we were doing music videos. It's just we were not interested in going into feature films.
And
we were amongst the few that didn't want to, actually.
The other thing that
Yeah.
the other thing that was really a big surprise to us is we didn't really know the power of the audience, of what pop culture was going to do. And what happened was, as soon as that gigantic turbine of energy got turned on, when people started watching videos, people couldn't get enough of it. And we used to say that we were raiding the art world, because like suddenly we'd take references from anything artistic and was just feeding them into the music videos. And what happened was it changed the way people use media. It changed the way people look at pictures, and it changed people's visual acuity and how they and their ability to really look at things. So when what we're hoping is that this same energy can extend through into this world.
Youth drove it. Youth was open to innovation, and seeing new things, and rock and roll was the language of youth in those days. And I think it's a similar thing as what's going on now around games and probably VR, interactive and VR. But the youth market was very, very open-minded and way ahead of the older generation. So it was a good time to be working. It was great. It was very exciting.
So Jean-Baptiste, they had legs in the commercial world. They listened to the laboratory. Well, you know, you're in one, obviously, a very big, wonderful laboratory.
Yes.
Were commercial considerations ever any part of the work that you've done?
I guess not. But I should be very clear about one thing. All the work that I've been presenting today has nothing to do with Erkki, actually. It's my own work. It was not done in that context. Yes, exactly. And to answer about your question about music videos, it's not that it's not interesting me, but as you could guess from my presentation, for the most part, I'm interested about the live nature, the performance, and I'm especially interested to get back the performers, the singers, into the game somehow of this. And I'm trying to do this back and forth trip, so to say, between the eye and the ear. I'm trying to answer to some of the concerns of Miller here. I think when you design things like what we're doing, and I'm sure you had similar concerns with music videos, we are taking many of these caveats that you mentioned into account. And in pieces like the ones you're going to see in here tonight, we are building the global situation in such a way that there are moments where we privilege the ear, and there are moments where we privilege the eye. That's part of the story, so to say, to come back to the story. And this is a form which can convey that aspect of the question, but you're absolutely right to say that you have to be conscious about that, and you have to count on it. If I may finish my personal note about that also, the trouble we have is that we are lacking tremendously scientific data about this cross-perception of image and music together. We have things about vision, we have things about music, but we have so little interesting things on which we could rely on. So therefore, we just have to work with our intuition and experiment. And we have to take into account that people who come to a concert like tonight, they have different backgrounds. Some of them are musicians, some of them are visual, more visual, so to say. And they don't receive things in the same way. But this is something I'm trying to take into account, and I built into what I was calling the interactive scenario. Sorry, I spoke too much.
Not at all. Technology in a large sense, to an everyday classroom teacher is my kids with their earbuds and their phones, you know, their favorite music. And so it's not even live, it's not even good canned, it's just with an earbud, you know, out. And so the other end is what you all represent, is this kind of new genre, which is live. I was thinking all the time, would you want this shown on a personal computer? And the answer, I think probably almost all of you would be preferably not. That is, you want people to come to your live events. That's right. Yes. Maybe you could each speak a bit about that. And, you know, KAIJA, I would love to ask you, I mean, at some point, I'm not asking you more tomorrow, but at some point, you kind of got sucked into this black hole, right? This wonderful space, where you realized your own gifts were visual as much as from your ear. Can you say a bit about how that happened? And were you very young? I know you know a bit about your career, but what was the trajectory of that in your life? And how has it come that this is such an important part in the creative work that you do? And of course, you're also a composer. We shouldn't forget that. You're not just a composer who people want to put visuals to.
No, I'm just composer.
Yes.
I don't want to put visuals anywhere. My imagination is what it is, and I have certain synesthetic, you know, that's part of my being. But I don't especially want to put visuals anywhere. I'm just writing my music. My collaboration with Jean-Baptiste is something special because he knows my music so well. Yes, well, I don't know what, I mean, apart from my operas, which is then something completely different, for me, music is enough. I was very interested in visuals. I was painting myself. I was in art school myself before I dared to be a composer. Before I realized that for me music is what is everything, and the visual is one part of it. And but so that was my personal. That's me. So that's all I am. I'm not quite sure why I'm sitting here with you, but but all what I hear is really interesting, and of course it interests me.
Refik Anadol, do you want to chime in on the issue of live versus some other way of experiencing your art?
So I think one of the most compelling part of having a power of computational new calculation mode, of course with a big respect to the musical experience itself, without any war between two sensorial worlds. I think my personal inspiration is coming from space itself, where we are experiencing the piece itself. So I think when the space you are experiencing the piece has an intelligence and kind of this sensitivity to the experience itself, then the story can become a whole different world. That's what I was like trying to dream about, these performances that are truly with a respect again to the why it is done. So that's then it becomes like a little bit fun to experiment with, and being in the mercy of those technology is a risky edge for sure, because and unfortunately I couldn't use too much laptops because of the massive calculation of space and some GPU computation that's necessary, and massive loads of data coming from so many sources. It has to be, there's a weird orchestra behind that. So, I mean, that orchestra is definitely pre-canned because of calculations should be, of course, done. So very different thinking coming together in one moment. It's so inspirational. And with that awareness has a new meaning than both of them individually. That juxtaposition has a potential of serendipity, I think.
Mike? Yeah. So I'm not primarily an artist. I'm primarily a system designer or a programmer or a researcher or something. And so I do get involved in artistic projects, but usually as in collaboration with composers or visual artists or other. And as such, it's kind of my job not to have an opinion. That's to say, the ideal piece of software should be the thing that allows you to do anything that you can possibly imagine. All you have to do is walk up to the computer and start up the software and then tell it what you want it to do, and then you've got it, right? And of course, I've been working at that aim all my life. The thing that happened to me was that it turned out that the software that I was writing for music turned out to be useful for making images as well. And so suddenly I got pulled into this world of making images. In fact, I've been involved in artistic projects with images since '97. And the only thing I can tell you is that the thing that is in common, the thing that I can see that is in common between what you do to make sounds come out of speakers and what you do to make images come out is the planning of causality, is figuring out what you want to have to lead to what, how, and that is and how also how you want the audience to perceive that, or rather, I'm actually putting myself in the shoes of a composer or a visual artist even when I say that. But it seems to me that the whole thing is a matter of planning what's going to make what happen, and in such a way as to put the musicians, if it's a live performance with musicians, as much in control of the important aspects of what you see and hear as possible.
At the break, I spoke briefly to my colleagues, Peter Guzaras and Mark Swin. I saw others here. There's other high-powered thinkers out here. Can I cajole or persuade one of all of you to make some comments now? Let's open it up here. Peter, go ahead.
There's a microphone here if people want to use it.
Peter's actually a real tenor.
So I have a question for Candace. You and I talked just briefly about this a bit before during the break. The intersection between storytelling, which at some level you said you weren't interested in, yet as Robert said when I saw what you had done for Michael Tilson Thomas, it was redolent with story.
I hope it came up. I was not interested in conventional storytelling.
Okay,
Yes,
so my question is, and I guess this works to all of you, Ms. SAARIAHO obviously with her works in opera, which is where my discipline comes from, you are always dealing with theater. So theater as it is defined at the moment, not always, but frequently, involves people coming to one place at one time, although with places like hopscotch it can be all over the city. But it's one place at one time to have a shared experience. Could you talk about how that works into your feelings, or if it does at all, or if you in fact would rather work against that?
No, I think the shared experience thing is incredibly powerful. And I think it was there even with music videos. Because what happened with music videos is in those days, people would turn their TVs on for hours, sometimes all day, just to have MTV on so they could watch videos. So to some degree, they participated nationally, internationally in the same event, in the same culture. A little bit the way we used to watch the news at 6. I'm old enough that I remember watching the news at 6 with my parents every night. But music videos were a lot like that, where youth across the world participated in the event of a really, really stunning video that was really, really exciting. And I think the live theatrical experience, that live moment is really, what is it? I mean, it's tribal. It's very, it's got a tribal quality. It's personal, but it's also tribal, and it's really cathartic. And I think that catharsis is just a really, really, it's a very exciting thing to work to obtain. And when you're talking about structuring experience and going towards something, there's moments, right, in a piece that you're moving towards, and you do want that catharsis ultimately. So I don't know if that helps.
The first person, and Peter knows this, the first person to really take advantage of this was Wagner, who designed Bayreuth with just one orchestra. There's no balconies. It's one orchestra. So the whole mass of the audience, now if you go to Bayreuth today, there are balconies. You say, well, I thought there were no balconies. Well, it's totally money. I mean, you can sell more expensive tickets and you have very nice, sort of little things off to the side and so forth, which in the 20th century they decided they needed to do. But Wagner's design was overwhelming, much like we do in a movie theater. I mean, directors are the biggest manipulators in the world, right? I wouldn't want to be married to one. I mean, that's kind of dangerous. One of the operas I am dying to see is Abbé. Adriano Amato, your opera. Now, I go out on YouTube, the only place I can go, and I have that wonderful 4-part documentary that I can download and look at, has bits and pieces of it, very intriguing. And I got little bits from here and there. But it's going to be difficult for me to get to a live performance of that, because it doesn't get staged every day, right? Although it gets performed, but I have to get on a plane probably and go someplace at some point. Is there any form you can imagine, whether it's IMAX or anything other than a live performance of Adriano Amato, that you can imagine would be artistically satisfying to you as the composer?
I would be very happy if there would be a good video, just a good video captation, as there is from my opera L'amour de Loin.
Exactly.
Which done by Peter Sellers himself, who was the first stage director. Unfortunately, nobody was interested in doing such a video. So, as successful as my music might be, it doesn't sell enough. So, I also would love to see Adriano Amato somewhere else than on stage.
That brings tears to my eyes. The rest of you who have done live installations, or at least this affects you, are there commercial incarnations of your work that you can imagine? I mean, make some kind of version. I go to a store, retail store, and buy, and whether in my home theater or my 17-inch Mac or whatever I can experience, would that work for you?
And not personally, but I think infected by the fact of using, for example, a great question about how to take an intimate experience of physical quality of reality. Right now, unfortunately, only option is a virtual reality glasses. Right now, they are literally trying to fake the reality by immersing us through this field of view and probably bringing some head tracking and that things. I mean, probably intentional or unintentionally, I think the fields may merge in a beautiful way if we have a chance to have a control of artistic direction with those tools. There's a big potential for sure. And I was very close to working with LA Phil for their Van Beethoven project, or an upcoming project, maybe early to reveal, but we are now trying to understand this phenomena, which is an amazing point that scientifically there's a very lack of research on this emerging fields. So we are trying to understand what is this phenomenon exactly? Like, I mean, of course, not the goosebumps to measure by EEG, heart tracking, or any kind of galvanic skin sensors on our body affecting us. The big question is, can we really put emotions that the audience is feeling into a story? Right now, we are all trying to create a reality to merge those fields. But what would happen if the audience itself is affecting real time, the story itself? Or, like, those kind of big questions, like all probably everybody in mind. But those are, I think, not commercially, but eventually NVIDIA, such as the world's leading graphic company, may support the project. I mean, support is a maybe better keyword than hopefully not dive into the commercial mercy of those people.
Jean-Baptiste, I spoke yesterday at lunch about I saw Lone on YouTube. That's how I got to know it. And it was not a very great video, not very high quality, out of my little speakers. And, you know, what is the relationship there between, of course, what we're going to see tonight, and Lone is going to be performed tonight, so don't miss it.
Well, it's all about documentation. The difference between forms should be in terms of the quality and the nature of the experience that you are offering. And the very form that we are developing with this visual concert story, like what you may see tonight, is really trying to build something which is about the life, about the performance conditions. And because there is video and projected video, to document that is really problematic. I mean, filming a video which is projected is something which is basically not really working. You can make projects which would be adjusted specifically for the form of being presented over YouTube and so on. But without mystery, it's a money question. or if it's not money, it's a question of time that you are ready to spend and to find the context to develop such a form. And I would be personally happy to do things like music videos about these things, but it would be a different form. It would not be the same thing. I would have to rework it completely conceptually from bottom up. The reason that kind of things doesn't happen is that because there's no market for that, or at least that's what the industry says, between quotes. And well, if we want to do it, we have to do it by our own means. And as you know, well, there are priorities. You do what you feel is more important. And what I feel is more important in our situation today is the presence, is the performance context where you have these extraordinary characters who are the singers, the musicians. Again, I was mentioning that before, which is incredible sedimented level of experience and knowledge that they bring on stage. And that is what is fascinating me and that I'm trying to focus on. But if the opportunity comes, I would be really happy to work on something which would be completely different. That would be a different project and a different form and something like that. I did that. If you look on YouTube, there's a couple of films about dance, actually, which I did on the music of KAIJA, and also about other things. So that it's really something else. But again, the performance, as we know, is somehow in danger, precisely because people are getting so much accustomed to find everything on YouTube, and it's true in schools actually. Since we are in school, I could say that many students don't take the pain to go to a concert because they can know that they can have 10 interpretations on YouTube or 20 interpretations on YouTube, which is a fantastic pedagogical tool. I'm not complaining about that, but I'm just afraid about the way it's killing, in some context, live performance situation. Mm-hmm. And that has to be preserved because it's part of our culture and our heritage. And there's things which are happening in this situation which are so exceptional and that no video on YouTube can capture. Video on YouTube can capture very beautiful things and some other things which you can't get in a performance. And this, again, are two different things. I don't want to oppose them, but I want to give more weight to the performance situation.
There's one thing in terms of the visceral aspects of having an experience. You know, like we're talking about opera, we're talking about being in this room and being in the presence of the musicians. It's a three-dimensional, it's a stereoscopic. It's the presence of having this experience that's in 3D. There's so much recording going on right now in terms of VR, in terms of virtual reality, where you put the headset on and you literally can look in all directions. And that's, the quality is getting better, but I mean, basically, you don't want to degrade the experience by like making these videos. We make these videos just to say we did it. It's like, this is a taster, right? But the thing is that if there was a beautiful, amazing visual experience that someone could have, that would attract a bigger audience, because I think what happens is that people feel like they want to go see it then because the debate is so attractive, you know, and it's not really advertising I'm talking about. I mean, this is actually just human nature. You see something that really impacts you. It is this visceral kind of effect on you. I think a high quality virtual reality teaser could be amazing to whet the appetite of a much bigger audience, I think.
Yeah, but speaking about opera, DVD, which is considered as a dead form now. I mean, again, market-wise, it was offering a possibility which has been very little used artistically, which is the angle thing. It was actually made for sports, for DVD or football or whatever. Where you could switch angles. In opera, you could basically have the 8 cameras which are used to capture a performance and put all the angles and allow people to move around. I don't think it would be appropriate to all operas, of course, and the stage director is working with the vision of a certain position into the space, and that has to be respected. So that's why when people like Peter Sellars are doing the DVD of L'Amour de Loin, he does something else that what is his interpretation in the whole is really exploiting the form of the DVD. But I've been expecting for years and years to see people that would make, especially operas, using that form, because it's a fantastic potential. And it's a form of interactivity which is perfectly respectable and which would give a very interesting possibility artistically.
Peter, along the way, did you get some response to your original question?
Yes.
Great, great. Mark, hold forth for a minute. I'd love to have your responses to what you heard.
Well, the one thing that struck me early on,
This is Mark Sweater, he's like pretty like LA Times.
that there's a kind of elephant in the room that hasn't been acknowledged in a way. And there was a very brief flashing of the name of Oscar Fischinger on the screen early on, who was the German emigre who did, in the 1930s, animations with classical music, abstract, using abstract forms. That's one of the things that led to Fantasia ultimately. And about 81, 82 years ago, a few feet from here at Royce Hall, John Cage was studying with Arnold Schoenberg, and finally had enough, being forced to learn the same harmony lessons over and over again. They weren't allowing him to move on. And in great outrage and rage, he walked out of the class and went to get a job with Oscar Fischinger. And great rebellion to UCLA, everything UCLA stood for and music here stood for. And with Fischinger, who he also didn't get along terribly well for long, he learned two things that basically changed the direction of 20th century art. One was through Fischinger and his Buddhist connections, Cage got interested in percussion music and realized it was an alternative to harmony. And the other is he learned how much he disliked the idea of connecting image to music. And he almost accidentally burned down Fischer's studio, in fact, falling asleep with a cigarette. And that changed an entire way of looking at music and image and thinking of them as independent activities so that one doesn't interfere with the other. And in some ways, then there's been a big rebellion. MTV is kind of exactly the opposite of that.
A counter-rebellion.
There's a counter-rebellion. But this really has had a huge effect and led to, I think, the most interesting and probably the least explored parts of music and image.
May I react on
Please.
this? Yeah. Well, thank you for putting this on the table. In the same time, I think it's really important historically to put that back in context. One of the aims, especially when he was working with Cunningham, was to get out of the classical relation between music and dance. And that was a radical gesture, which was provocative, of course, to start again. The question is, isn't it time to go one step further? Isn't it time, with the tools and knowledge we have today, which are completely different, to try to build other forms of relations? Because we are not at all in the same situation. We don't have things which are prescriptions from the academy, which are forcing to build these relations in a very peculiar way, which would be always the same and very conservative. It's quite the contrary. Everything is possible today. There is a freedom of art in art, which is so extraordinary that anybody can do anything. So for me, there is a risk that this historical landmark of, in particular, the connection between Cage and Cunningham, acts as a syndrome. And to do not take the responsibility of the challenge to build new forms of relations. And I see too many projects of that sort where supposedly collaborations are not collaborations at all, because people are just doing one thing and the other. They don't care about what the others are doing. Or if they care in a kind of ideological or political fashion, which is trying to keep, let's say, how would you say in English, but to keep power, not to be scratched by the other dimension, what the people are doing in the other dimension. And that's the death of collaboration. So I'm calling for an act of responsibility to all the youngsters, for all the young artists, to take that challenge, to renew the relations, and not to stop with this idea of parallels, which are, because they are parallels, will never join together.
Who else in the audience would like to say something? That isn't my colleague Bob Fink there, is it?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Bob, please talk.
Okay.
This is Robert Fink, the author of the major text on minimalism, but a lot of other stuff too, and running our music industry minors over at UCLA.
Well, I guess, yes, I have a question that is sort of picking up from what Mark said, which I'm sure that at some level, you know, John Cage can be blamed for many things, right? But there's, I don't think it would have been possible for him to really have that idea outside of an age of recordings. I mean, you know, if you think about imaginary landscape number one, right? The Jones on that thing is that it's created in a radio studio using machinery that was never supposed to be seen by anybody, and it represents, in a sense, a pure sonic experience that became kind of an idea, right? That this was a set of sounds that had no fingers, right? Nothing to see here, and thus it allowed for some kind of pure thought structure. And I think if I get the sense behind what Mark is saying, he's a little bit nostalgic for that dream. When I went to I went to a Green Umbrella concert, and you finally got to hear Gesamte Jünglinge with the full surround sound, which was a movie. It was an incredible movie, and it made me realize you can never teach that piece in a classroom with two crappy speakers. Because people think Stockhausen was a chump.
Although he made the stereo arrangement.
Yeah, but
so right.
Yeah, no, exactly in the way that you were talking. So I guess the question, if there is one, or just like the phantom that's hovering here, is except that some kind of notion of pure sonic identity is really an epiphenomenon of money, of commodifying music in recordings. Maybe Edison is the guy you really should blame, right? Because he's the guy who figured out the way that you could actually detach sound from any image and just retail it. He was the one who staged the tone tests, where he put the real musician behind the curtain, and people couldn't tell the difference between his diamond disc reproducer and the thing. So I just don't know whether you ever want to meditate on this kind of what maybe is a past history of pure sound, and whether does it come back in your work as in some way?
Well, it never stops for.
Yes, and in a way, this you could argue that sense of being a composer, and I don't mean at all to say anything other than this is not in any way critique. It's possible in an age of recordings.
What I don't understand is that why should we oppose things? There are different forms, and I believe there will be always music. It's just like to listen. And there are some other things. There are some other people, and there are few around this table who are trying something else. And that doesn't disqualify at all the rest. That's again a luxury about what we are. But there is a risk that for commercial reasons, some organizers sometimes, some producers, some festival people, they tend to believe that today you need to have image to make some music acceptable. But I take it as a call for responsibility. in the name of artists, to refuse that and challenge to offer a form which will provide the proof that it exists for a reason, which is providing a different artistic experience.
Did you want to respond to that, Bob?
Well, I certainly don't want to somehow appear to be the advocate of pure sound. At all. I mean, certainly, someone who studies academic minimalism, deeply reductive and repetitive music, you could certainly, imagine a way to do that. But it's just, I'm sort of struck by the idea that, on the one hand, what you just said, that somehow images are brought in some kind of way to rescue music which is outside of people's comprehension. On the other hand, the experience of the early ages of MTV was that music that was very, very popular and easily comprehensible allowed you guys latitude to either, the storehouse of modernist art and to do things that were very abstract.
Well,
So-
we didn't spend our time just plundering. So we
Well,
actually- yeah. But that's a legitimate observation, because I think, and I think Mike would agree, the essence of commercial work is plundering a lot of our fine art. That's commercial directors need to do that because they're working on very short. They have to produce work at a high level in a very short amount of time, so they often start with that. But that wasn't our intention, was to plunder. And we know well about it because we know of several very, very famous directors who were sued for plundering the work of some very fine artists. Okay, and we're happy that they had to pay. I mean, I started out in avant-garde film. I had a career for several years as an avant-garde filmmaker, and I had trouble showing my work in the U.S. I showed my work mostly in Europe.
No, let me just say, I was definitely one of those people who kept the television on through all of 1984 and 85 and 86, sometimes with the sound off. Right? Because you're just waiting to see something interesting. Then you would turn it on again and see if the music was up to it. So it wasn't actually the appropriation part, it was just the idea that one part of the equation needs, in a commercial world, to supplement the other.
I see that Gloria is still here. And I just want to say, by the way, everybody who presented today and everybody who's up on the stage here right now were Gloria's idea. And Gloria contacted them, and Gloria put this entire thing together. She's supposed to be a pianist, but you're a producer. And that's wonderful. She's playing, and I got to hear them the other day. The wonderful prelude and ballade that she's playing tonight on a beautiful Steinway shipped in from downtown. Laura, do you have any comments you want to make? I'm sure you have to go at some point. Warm up or whatever you're going to do.
I put this together because I'm fascinated by the interaction of these artists, and because I know nothing about it, and that's why I wanted to hear so I could learn something. And I'm glad you're here.
My colleague Neil Spolberg is sitting right next to her. I can't pass up the opportunity to ask you if you have any comments, Neil. You certainly do. I'm sure you have something to say.
Well, I'm always interested in.
Neil's our director of orchestral studies at UCLA, a wonderful pianist, a wonderful conductor, and has done opera and everything. So he works closely with Peter on our operatic productions and so on. So.
I'm always interested, thank you, Robert, in the perception that I think someone has raised already, that today's audiences more and more are unused to the experience of sitting for half an hour and being able to, without the help of any visuals besides the visuals of the performance, stitching together the logic of and structure of a work. It's just not in the experience of younger generations quite so much to do that without visuals. And I just wonder, I mean, the people on the panel are involved with combining these media, but I wonder if they have anything to say, any perspective about maintaining, developing this skill, this capacity among audiences, and if they feel that the work that they're offering actually can enhance that, or whether what's needed is an approach that causes a listener to simply have to close one's eyes and concentrate and listen for an extended period and put together these arguments for themselves.
Now, I want to add to what Neil's saying, that it was the Victorians who really set up KAIJA, right? That is, reading in isolation as a tremendously important part of the good life. That they had reading rooms. That's what reading rooms were, small places where you're studying. And you got a book and it was absolutely silent, and you read for several hours every day. Today, Neil, in my class, I have 50 music majors for a year. They have a break for 2 hours. Every day, it's a YouTube video that is shown being passed around the class frantically. Now, it's often of a cat dancing on the keys, Mark, and playing, some piece of music and so forth. But often it's something very interesting. I mean, I get a lot of ideas for things I do with them, things I'm putting in my own program, actually, from these little intermission breaks. The kids are terribly visual, but the counter part of what you're saying is listening to a piece of music very closely without that aid is very difficult for them. They get quite restive, they get squirmy, and so forth. So I wonder if, slow it up, please, over here.
If I may.
And just identify yourself if you don't mind.
My name is Nathan Granner, also an opera singer.
And a tenor.
And also an installation artist. A lot of these things are predicated by boards and people who are hiring artists in concerts across the nation and across the world. They are the ones that want to see the image. And these aren't for the kids necessarily. These are 50, 60, 70 somethings that are bringing people in to bring in those images that do indeed sometimes destroy the music. I've been a part of it, but it also enhances the music as well. There's a massive argument for and against, the pros and cons, but a lot of it has to do with how are we supposed to make a living and who is doing the hiring.
I could say, I think you could do a really good job at something, and then there's really not so good job, at making images. I mean, just because there are images doesn't mean that, okay, performances with images aren't as strong. It's just that so happened that the person doing that, maybe like what you were saying earlier about the collaborations. I mean, when we sat down at the kitchen table with Tom Mattis and talked about Arcadiana, it was amazing. It really opened everything up.
The greatest piece of music for string quartet of this century, by the way, I argue.
Well, it was extremely interesting because, well, first I was personally interested in the idea of Arcadia, but every one of the miniatures is how we ended up thinking about it, of Arcadia had a musical inspiration, sometimes more than one, and it often had a visual art inspiration. And Tom's mother is a very well-known scholar of surrealism. So it was really fantastic to talk with him about it. It just was really fantastic. And that helped a lot. But we don't think all music needs visuals. And I've been in concerts where half the time I close my eyes when there's visuals, even when they're done by friends. Just because I find it's too much. And I think there's a tendency maybe to initially think that if music gets intense, you need intense images, and I don't think that's true. I think when you deal with a piece of music, you have to think about at what points are you helping to express the ideas in the music? Are you competing with it? You don't want to be doing that. Music it has to take the center stage at certain points, and the images would support that and retreat from it even. So I think there's a lot of decisions you have to make. They're very, very important decisions to make.
One thing I'll add, because I remember you mentioned Oscar Fischinger, my teacher, Jules Engel. He was on Fantasia. He actually was offered by Oscar Fischinger to make a film with him. At the time, he was young and too busy. But he said that he was really put off by the what we call Mickey Mousing, the sort of the didactic translation and pairing of the visuals with the music.
Which is even a problem in music videos, the notion that you can do everything to the beat. That's how you make a good visual.
So really these pairings, were like a really good pairing of picture and music actually can engage the audience and let the audience build this third element, like we say in filmmaking, montage. It's the A plus B equals C. It doesn't equal AB.
Well, when I see the work, for example, of Jean-Baptiste, the first thought I have actually is if there's any other art form I think of, it's not cinema, it's actually modern dance, which I think your work incorporates it as a genre, I mean, very wholesale in a wonderful way. And of course, a lot of modern dance companies are now doing a lot of very sophisticated work with imagery. So I think there's a connection there. Neil, was I responsive at all to your thought? Ready?
Oh, I just want to tell you, Jean-Baptiste, I loved those round projection screens you had in the piece. That was fantastic.
We didn't let them make any for tonight, though.
Yeah, that was really.
We said, out of the question.
Concerning tonight's concert, I just would like to say that every other piece doesn't have videos, and then so you can.
We're going to hear an extraordinary piece for solo violin, which my colleague Moses Bogosian played. I was talking to Ms. SAARIAHO about it last night at Berkeley. She heard Jennifer Coe play the piece. Tonight she's going to hear Moses Bogosian play it. So, yes, exactly. This is not a cinematic experience. It's a musical experience that's enriched by a lot of other things. I saw a hand back here. Yes, and this tells who you are.
My name is Maxim Kuzin. I'm the orchestral conductor here at UCLA, doing my doctorate with Professor Stalberg here. I work myself in orchestral setting, symphony orchestra, and opera for some time in Ukraine. So my observation and the question that we're talking today is kind of very interesting because we're talking now whether we need what you just presented for us here, which is very interesting question in itself, because I think with the appearance of opera, there should not be any question whether we need any image, on stage, because that's already, the historically happened. So, and the combination of different arts on stage is actually one of the part of our experience that we are having today. So we cannot say that we don't need opera because it combines, the painting and whatever we see on stage with music, with drama, theater. So that's for me clear. So what I think is necessary to understand is why somebody told today that the opera is dying. So that's we hear this for some time already, and I think that the question is what type of experience we need to present to public and to audiences that will give them something that they cannot get at any other means of communication. And I believe that for now, probably until a certain time, that is 3D, because we still don't have enough available, sources to get that. Well, it appears already. I mean, we will have it soon. I'm sure that we will have. There will be other questions, but I think this is one of the things. And I wanted to ask the panelists here is since you worked in both symphony concert setting and opera, so what is the difference for you working in these settings, if there is any?
Yeah, actually, before they respond, it's a great question, by the way. I'm constantly telling my students, if you go to an average, any theory book, McGraw-Hill, Norton, doesn't matter. There's no opera in it, because opera's messy and takes too much space on the page. We teach them a theory course recently that has no opera. It has a Tannhäuser prelude and a Tristan prelude, but no opera, not a word, not a note of Mozart. And I tell my students in our year together that starting in 1600, it's all about opera. Opera drives everything. Opera, by the way, drives sonata form. Opera, all the stuff that you read about endlessly in these theory books, all comes out of opera. And so we have been a visual art, right? These since, for hundreds of years, that's where the main public interest has been focused and concentrated, what Peter does for us. So, please, go.
I really have to apologize, but we were supposed to finish at 6. We have a rehearsal, so we have to go out. I'm sorry. Our deepest apologies, and we would like to continue to discuss with you, but we have to prepare what's next. Sorry about that.
And I see we have run 10 minutes over. So Maxime, I don't know whether we have time to I want to respond to what Maxime.
Actually, I think that I found them. During our collaboration with LA Phil, and it was my very first major collaboration. So maybe very honestly and truly, I want to say maybe something about that may help all these questions, and maybe hopefully help for the upcoming generations. So I believe 21st century is bringing quantified data. Right now, we are totally talking about a very emotional, very poetic pieces of exploration and languages for sure. But I believe if there's an opportunity for academical, scientific, and technological explorations, I highly believe those questions can be really answered in the even neuroscientific level, even physiological level. I believe there will be a big explorations coming up to really reveal the science behind that, and there may be a beautiful communication between those tools, can reveal the hidden science and make it a poetic new revealing options maybe for the new material, which can be data, can be light. So I highly believe that the positive, very optimistic future of combining those tools to bring a new language is highly possible, and hopefully I'll do my very best as a person with a group of teams, and hopefully that may be something very positive for the upcoming world of performing arts to define maybe new genre for the 21st century.
On that very incomplete note, I want to thank all of you for attending today, to Gloria again for giving us a wonderful couple of hours together. The legendary Bill Viola, we had a chance to see another Perez intensification of wonderful work is there by Perez. I think in 20 minutes, is it, Gloria?
Yeah, like 26 minutes.
In 26 minutes, yes. And where did we go? Erkki, I didn't get a chance to even ask you to comment. You of all people should have, of course. Maybe you could make the final remarks and tell us where to go at 6:30-ish or wherever we're going.
Okay, so let me make it very practical. So, yes, we still have a screening for those who are interested. It is by probably the, shall we say, one of the most famous video artists probably in the history of that medium, Bill Viola, which is a work called Dessa, based on Edgar Varèse's famous composition of that name. So we will be screening right after this. This is over right now, so the Bill Viola video here. And then the next thing will be KAIJA's concert at the Schoenberg Hall, so that starts at 8 o'clock. So that will leave you a little bit of time to chill out, maybe whatever you want to do. So look at some of those.
And Sarah is just 26 minutes.
Yeah, so this video is 26 minutes by Bill Viola.
And don't miss it.
Yeah, it's a classic. If you haven't seen it, I recommend stay and watch it. And Robert, can I thank you also for your tremendous...
I wanted to thank you, Erkki, for really putting things in an incredibly rich context that made all this other stuff, so much richer and more engaging. It was really wonderful.